Markets Now is brought to you by the 5-year anniversary of Brevant Seeds. Here's to 5 years of not just winning, but collecting one game-changing W after another. See all of our wins at brevant.com/wins.
And welcome to Markets Now. I'm Michelle. I work with John Scheve of Scheve Grain. The livestock futures mixed this morning, cattle to the plus side, hogs lower, and then over in the grains, we're seeing just a slightly lower wheat market, but corn and soybeans are to the plus side. So, John, let's start off talking about soybeans. Up yesterday and today, some of this is anticipation of this trade aid announcement, or is this China hopes at this point?
I think it's China trading hopes. Beans have been in such a sideways trading mode here that it's hard for November to get to 10.50. It's also pretty hard for it to go to $10. So it wants to sit in that 10.25 range up and down a little bit each day. So uh, I think there's a lot of hope that some kind of trade deal is made. And I think you have a lot of farmers who just aren't going to sell beans at this value because they believe there is a chance that there will be a trade deal made at some point. If it isn't in the next 30 days, that it'll be in the next 3 months. And so you have a lot of beans just not going to market and finding storage somewhere. While harvest is on, a lot of people just aren't paying attention to anything. They're just trying to get harvest done. Last week had almost no farmers calling in. They were busy. It was probably the best 7-day run for the entire country. And so they're just sitting back waiting to do something until they see something they like, or they're forced to do something because they run out of room.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of producers that have said, I haven't stored beans for years. I'm going to store, hope basis improves. And if I get a trade aid payment, I may be able to hold on longer.
Exactly. And so that's going to change the basis market. It may not change the futures much, but it is going to change the basis, and you're going to see the basis bids pop somewhat, and pop is probably 10 to 20 cents around the country. We're starting to see that already in some processors in North Dakota, where the harvest is well past 75% done. Even as you keep moving down to the center part of the country, you're starting to see some improvements. I've still noticed that along I-80, the bids are just about ready to start coming back up, but they had dropped back here a couple days ago when the harvest was at full peak and the lines were incredibly long.
John, when we talk about the trade war in soybeans, how is this different than 1819?
The way I would view it as being different is twofold. One, the carryout is identical based upon what the USDA is suggesting we're going to export, and whether we export that number is still questionable and could be difficult because Brazil did have a big crop. But the USDA is already starting off with a number that is as tight as the worst year during the carryout, during the first trade war. So that to me says maybe it doesn't have to get as bad as everyone fears. That doesn't mean that numbers are going to be good either, but maybe it just doesn't have to be as bad. The other thing is we substantially planted more corn. And so, when they talk about, well, maybe the farmer's going to get paid for the beans from the trade war. Well, I hope that they also remember that the reason that there aren't as many beans currently being planted is because everyone feared the trade war. Everyone chose to put corn in the field. I mean, with 80 million versus a normal 85 million acres of beans, there's 5 million less acres of beans, which is 250 million extra bushels of beans off the market. But in replacement, that's hurting the corn values because we added an extra 500 million bushels of corn to the bottom line, which is going to put our carry out at 2 billion. So if we're going to subsidize the soybean farmer for not sending corn, well, we should also be subsidizing the corn farmer just as much, and or the cotton farmer or the wheat farmer, because some acres were switched away from beans to something else. So every farmer got hurt from the trade war and China not buying beans. They just might be being affected in a different way. Even I was talking to a farmer in North Dakota who had to raise navy beans because he couldn't afford to put beans in, and he was scared to keep putting corn in, and his prices were even down. And so it affects every crop, the small ones and everything. So this isn't just a soybean issue, it's an entire ag issue.
But these soybean yield reports, again, are pretty disappointing in some areas, especially like in the northwestern Corn Belt, aren't they?
Well, disappointing is a relative term. The processor or the producers that I talked to in the Dakotas yesterday all had been hoping for at least 10 bushels above their average. Let's say their average is 42. They were hoping for about 50. They're coming in between 41 and 44. So right around their average for what they normally do. The surprise, though, is the flip side, Ohio, where it was incredibly dry. I talked to numerous producers over there, and they all shared that I was expecting, fields that should do 65 as an average. I was expecting them to come in at 55, and they're coming in anywhere from 64 to 68. And I'm like, wait, you're producing nearly average yields? And they're like, yeah. And to me, that just says that, wait, there might not be a bad spot overall in the country for beans. It may be less than what they expected or hoped for at harvest, but it's telling me that there may not be any problems, but there isn't any great area either. We did hear some southeast Nebraska, northeast Kansas yields that are substantially above normal. I had two producers in southeast Nebraska who irrigate part of their beans and have dry land on the other part, and they tell me that their dry land yields are doing better than their irrigated. That doesn't even make any sense, but it must have just been better ground holding the moisture in a way that just producing great yields. Down there, we're seeing some dry land that should normally do 45 bushels. It's doing 75 bushels per acre. So it's insanely good down in that region, but that's a small region. In general, though, we're just finding that it's at least average or above. So I don't know that we can expect too much of a drop in the national yield.
Okay, what about corn? Do you think we'll see a drop in the national yield? And obviously, we are not going to get a WASDE out tomorrow to verify that or not.
We won't get a WASNI out in October. From what I've been told by a couple of people, that if we don't have the government up and running by October 22nd, that it's unlikely we even get a November report. So the question will be, will the markets be open by then? I The odds favor that the yield will be reduced a little bit just because that's how everyone is betting. But the yields that I'm hearing in the Dakotas, they are coming in, the early yields coming in are substantially above normal. I mean, we're looking at yields up there should normally be 150 to 175. They're running 175 to 210. So they're significantly above normal. The Ohio crop, the corn is coming in surprisingly better than we expected. It's nearly average. Southern Indiana, we talked to people there, they're still coming in at or slightly above average. So Central Illinois, a little bit the same way. It seems to be right at average, maybe slightly above. It doesn't seem like there's any problem areas out there. So if we don't have any problem areas, yes, I know that rust was a question. The disease pressure was there, but we just did almost all of our dryland corn, and the test weight coming off of it in southeast Nebraska was the highest I've ever seen dryland. It was all coming in over 60 pounds on the test weight, which is unheard of. Usually we come in around 58. So there seems to be really, really good test weight out there. I think that the yields are there. Does the USD have to drop the yields much? Probably not.
And then the other problem that compounds that is that we do have a lot of old crop corn in storage that maybe we haven't accounted for. Is that right?
My feeling has always been that the USDA struggles with trying to measure old crop that gets carried over to the next year, because in theory that doesn't play real well with a statistical analysis. The other thing is these grain bags. How does the USDA account for those? How do we know how many were used? We know maybe how many were manufactured if there was a way to talk to every manufacturer, but I've got farmers that have had 3 bags sitting in their shed for a number of years just in case they need to use them, but they've never used them. I've also heard of some farmers that are filling bags with old crop corn in the middle of harvest just so their neighbors don't know that they're doing that. And to me, that just says, hey, there's a lot of corn still out in the country. And how do you account for that? These bags are probably going to keep the corn market from tanking below $4 for any length of time, if it even goes back there. But at the same time, there's going to be so much corn, and the farmer was hoping for 475, I think, to break even on the futures on the December. But I think at this point, they're probably going to be down sub 4 450 is going to be their goal, or 450 is going to be their goal. So anytime we get up there, that's going to be a great place to try and sell some corn or not put it in a bag, because the bag is a variable cost that they have to decide. Is it worth filling or not filling? And what do they want for our cash flow? I mean, bags aren't the safest thing in the world to use compared to a grain bin, but they are better than selling across the scale at very low numbers. So I think each farmer that has one of those is going to have to weigh their risk reward.
So one last question for you from a marketing standpoint. We've just talked about how more producers are trying to store and hold. Is that the strategy here if you have on farm? Because I know commercial storage is fairly expensive.
Absolutely. You need to be storing it on the farm in any sort of way you possibly can. The market is telling you to do that. And if you can, you have to. It may not be the way you want to do it. It may not be cost effective, and you may have every excuse under the sun to do it or to not do it. But the market is screaming that it wants you to store as much as you can and hold it off of the market until the harvest is over. This is one of those years where being done first, there's no prize for being done first harvesting. There will be a prize for being the very last one done, because you will be able to haul straight out of the field into the processor, because they're going to be looking for grain after everyone else is done and the bin doors are locked. So if you don't have enough storage, don't be in a hurry to get done.
All right. Thanks for your advice. That is John Scheve with Scheve Grain and Markets Now.
You were right.
You were right.
You were right.
Well, you were right. When you choose your seed brand, there's winning, and then there's...
You were right. Should have gone with Brevant seeds.
When you choose Brevant seeds, you don't just win, you get to be right. Don't just win. Talk with your retailer or visit Brevant.com/win to get started.